Hello, I'm Claire Pijoula, the co-founder of Wanted Design, and this is CLOSEUP.
Good morning, I'm Odile Hainaut, co-founder of Wanted Design, and we are back live from Brooklyn for a second day of CLOSEUP programming. So today we will speak a lot about how we can design more sustainable and healthier interiors and public spaces. We'll have amazing speakers and brands from Europe, from the United States, and this afternoon again our dedicated session with amazing North American studio, and we will present it with Dwell magazine. At 1:30, you don't want to miss the presentation of Royce Epstein, Future Wave for Mohawk. And if you have to leave us at one point today, come back at 5 p.m. We'll be back on stage with Stacy Shoemaker and Phil Robinson, Claire, myself, William Hanley, and our special guest, Jamie Deringer from Design Milk, for a wrap-up, a little highlight of the day, and a special announcement for 2021. So you don't want to miss that. To start the day, we have a great conversation hosted by Stacy with terrific guests, and we will speak about New York and how we can bring our city back.
We're pleased to be here at Industry City for day 2 of CLOSEUP. CLOSEUP is a new concept inspired by a TV show that we invented together with ICFF in response to the current situation and the cancellation of our shows last spring. This is a new way for you, architects and designers, to discover products, source products, and understand the story and people behind them. The morning session will include Lynn Rosé, Laufen, and Ressource. We'll have Antoine Rosé joining us live from France. We'll have Marcel Wanders joining us live from Munich, Gabriele Chiave from Marcel Wanders' studio from Amsterdam, and Julien Chapuis coming here on stage with us for Ressource for a live painting demonstration. It's going to be a busy morning.
Oh yeah, get ready.
If you can stay all day, it's okay, don't worry. You'll be able to see everything on replay. And actually, day 1 is already available. So right after CLOSEUP, you'll have the 2 days available on replay. If you want to interact with us, which we encourage you to do, you can talk to us on Instagram at Wanted Design or at ICFF Official, and you can also use the Q&A box on your screen. I'd like to thank our media partners, HD Magazine, Design Milk, Dwell, and Clever Podcasts, to present CLOSEUP with us. Thank you, Lutron, for sponsoring the Clever episode, Wakanine and David Trowbridge for sponsoring the stage, and EQ3 for sponsoring the North American studio sessions. And lastly, thank you, Industry City, for being such a wonderful supporter of design throughout the years, and once again, today, for hosting CLOSEUP.
Yeah, so let's do it. Let's get started. Stacy, stage is yours. We'll let you introduce our rock star guest of the day. Stay with us.
Thank you so much, Claire and Odile, and welcome everyone. As they mentioned, my name is Stacy Shoemaker-Rowan. I'm Senior Vice President of the Design Group at Emerald and Editor-in-Chief of Hospitality Design Magazine, and I will be your host throughout the morning, so hopefully you don't get sick of me. I'm so excited to have some New York City icons on today's opening panel. What an incredible group of leaders from business and tourism to architecture and interior design and hospitality. I am honored to welcome in studio, which makes me so happy to see my dear friend David Rockwell, who is founder and president of Rockwell Group. We also have Melba Wilson, who's owner of Melba's Restaurant and the president of the New York City Alliance, and also my new favorite person. And then on camera, we have Alan Steele, who is president and CEO of the Javits Center. Hi, Alan, how are you? He's live from Javits, I believe.
I'm actually live from home this morning,
okay.
but
Well, thank you for joining us. It's so good to see you as well. So let's just dive in. You all in New York, you all have a high profile in Melbourne restaurants, David in design. Alan, you lead, one of the largest convention centers, from hotels and restaurants to Broadway theater. So let's start with what we're all dealing with, especially in New York, coronavirus and the pandemic. You've all been hit hard. How are you working through these extraordinary challenges these days, through business, trying to, how have you maneuvered through the last 8 months? Melba, maybe you want to start with that?
definitely. This has totally been one of the most difficult times in my life and one of the most difficult times in the history of my business. At Melba's, we're a family. So when you look at, I'm the sole owner, but my employees, they're my family. So on March 17th, when I had to tell them, the majority of them, that by no fault of their own, they would no longer have a job, income, a way to support their families, had to be one of the most difficult times in my life. One of the things we did was we pivoted. Right. And that's what New Yorkers do. We pivoted. We said, what can we do collectively to change this situation in any way that we could? So we expanded our hours. Takeout and delivery was the only thing that we could do at the beginning. We got our social media game up. We reached out to friends, to families, to neighbors, to customers. And that's what we did. One of the most important things that we did was we reached out to a dear friend of ours who's sitting right beside me, Mr. David Rockwell.
Yes, and we'll get to that in a second, because I think that what you two have done together for the city is quite amazing. David, 200 plus people in a firm, design and hospitality, a big part of it. I mean, hospitality, a big part of your design firm. This isn't your first crisis, but how has this been different than others in previous, and how have you, managed through it?
Well, as Melba said, it was and has been incredibly difficult and painful. One of the surprises was just functionally we pivoted to remote working really quickly, and have, as you know, an amazing group of people who love the studio and run the studio, and two great partners and really great senior administration. And they figured out how to technically accommodate people working remotely, which in some ways, that was the immediate focus was, how do we scramble to deal with the first blow of that? Before that happened, I was dealing with the implications of the pandemic when restaurants and theater closed down. Right. And I would, as you know, always think about architecture from the inside out. Right. And I started to think about, how New York City, with theaters and restaurants closed, is very much like an empty theater. It's all hardware and no life. So we started to work remotely. We had our first town hall meeting, and everyone wanted to hear what our plan was. So I opened it up by saying, well, look, here's the good news. The good news is we don't depend on people coming together to congregate to make a living. And there was this dead silence. And I said, I'm kidding, that's exactly what we do. I said, so we need to figure out how we're gonna help each other, and how we're gonna reach out to our clients, and how we're gonna respond to this moment in some way that is helpful. So those were our first instincts. And then there were a few people I called early on, and Melba was one of them. We had known each other, I think, since 1993. Yeah. Oh. And the thing I recognized in hospitality was, in some way, what I wanted to think about is how to make returning to restaurants safe for workers and emotionally safe for customers. So when Melba and I started talking and strategizing, it was without a specific plan. It was trying to solve for that problem and trying to brainstorm how, and that's what designers do, is they think of creative solutions. So how we could think about ways to help the city. So
let's continue on that thread. Tell us about Dine Out, and what it entailed, and how that came to be from your conversations.
Well, there was definitely a need. And so with David and I speaking, it was an industry that employs over 300,000 people, over 26,000 restaurants in this city. And the need was, New York City is the hospitality capital of the world. How do we keep our workers employed? How do we keep New Yorkers employed, as David said, in a safe environment? That was totally the goal for us. How do we keep small businesses thriving in a safe environment? And sitting down together, brainstorming, David came up with modules, outdoor seating. It was deemed that sitting outdoors at that time was safer. However, you have to realize a lot of us had been closed for months on ends now, with no revenue coming in. I always like to say 0% of the revenue in most cases, but still 100% of the bills.
Yeah.
How do we afford the outdoor seating, especially for smaller businesses like myself? And David put together some strategic partners, investors, and he and his team worked pro bono. And not just for Melba's, but for restaurants in all of the 5 boroughs of the city. I think, and Chinatown was hit devastatingly hard.
Yeah.
And what actually prompted our thinking about it was a lot of people wanted to talk about, well, how's New York going to respond? How's hospitality going to respond? And I started to speak to restaurateurs around the country, and it was Richard Melman in Chicago at a midnight discussion when we were talking about what are the things that would make customers want to start, because at that moment, people weren't leaving their apartment.
Right.
New Yorkers really responded in a very proactive way to the pandemic in terms of wearing masks, staying home. So as we thought about that, we of course looked at outdoor seating, and then actually we formed a small group. We got Andrew Ridgie also, and we put together a very complete deck of every version of how a restaurant might open outdoors in the street. And we started proactively engaging with the city, with the Department of Transportation. And that became a very intense conversation about sharing public space.
Right.
And I do think one of the things I love about New York is for every idea someone has, there are at least 8 people who are going to hate it.
Yep.
It's just one of those cities in which everyone coexists being quite different.
Right.
So taking the parking lane and making that available for dining was contentious for a whole bunch of reasons. And to me, the fact that the city has just adopted it,
Right.
and now we see it, this kind of expression of life happening on the street. So once we had the deck together, we started really speaking every morning and every night about how to get it adopted from a legislation point of view, how to make it affordable, and how to make it scalable, so that when legislation approved outdoor dining that day, we had Melba's open, and we did 5 other restaurants, at least 1 in each borough.
Right.
And Andrew Ridgie and Melba helped put together a strategy of the most needed restaurants. And our fantasy was always that it wasn't just for individual restaurants, it was for communities.
Right.
But you can imagine, as we got into that, we were told, well, to be part of a community, someone has to adopt it and own it.
Right.
It can't just be public space. So after the success of the first 6, then DOT really engaged with us in an incredible way and worked together quickly to get what's now 5 full neighborhood installations done.
It's amazing.
Which has been phenomenal. This is great for business. It's great to keep our employees working, but it's also great mentally for our communities.
Yep.
Totally.
I have to mention this is such an amazing story. We're sitting down the first day, June 22nd. I remember it like it was yesterday. And one of my neighbors.
It was a beautiful sunny day.
Beautiful day.
Yeah.
One of my neighbors who lives lives literally on the block, walked by with her young daughter. And tears started rolling down her eyes. Oh. And of course, we were quite concerned. We didn't know what was going on. And she said, Melba, who did this? And I'm like, who did what? And she goes, this is beautiful. She goes, we don't see things like this up in Harlem. Huh. And I'm sitting there with tears in my eyes, and I'm about to cry. And I just pointed to David. And she was so grateful. And it was at that moment, not only did we need it as business owners and as employees, but our communities needed this. They needed a moment and a safe place to be able to get out of the house, to commune, and to just feed off of one another.
Right. And I love how it's changed almost the fabric of the city, right? Like it's made it much more of a pedestrian, lively, just, like it just feels more alive, you know, and I think that, to
And
your
it-
point, what we needed.
And it's also given individual restaurants a real opportunity for creative expression.
Right.
Within a sort of simple format, there's a lot you can do.
So explain the format. How did you keep costs down, and talk about the structure or the package that you created to allow people to do this?
Well, we started with trying to develop a modular system,
Right.
which was based on the size of the parking lane and not displacing buses or bike lanes. Can't displace the bike people. So, you know, there were all of these considerations. And then we were trying to figure out who would build it. And I got a phone call from someone who worked at a scenic shop that was out of work. And we started to think about, you know, there's industries right now that have no available work,
Yep.
like the theater industry, which is, you know, in such awful, painful shape. So we had a Broadway scenic designer shop make these modules, which would level up to the curb, that could take power.
Right.
And, you know, one of the early things to solve was the lane that was open to the traffic had to be protected, which led to that 18-inch solid barrier. In our case, we did it out of plywood, simple awning. And I think one of the things that we thought about early on is to make them strong enough so they could come back next year, not knowing that that was going to be a possibility, but, you know, so it wasn't just a one-time use. And we're continuing, actually. Melba and I and our team are now looking at how to pivot to dine in with a whole series of new things we're researching with, you know, no idea what we'll be able to get done, but
Right.
just grateful. It's so gratifying to be able to look at design as a way to proactively help and not just critique.
Right. No, I love that. And let's bring Alan into this a little bit too. I mean, as someone who runs a convention center, when you say you can't bring people together, Alan, tell us how, you know, how your world has been, what you've been doing at Javits, and you have some exciting new things happening, though, the renovation and, you know, the new space that's coming online. So tell us a little bit about what's happening in your world.
Well, as Melba referred to before, we had to pivot. It was actually the last day of the New York Restaurant Show, which was the beginning of the build of the hospital, the Javits New York Medical Station. So we closed down the restaurant show and we started building a medical station. We've had no events since March of this year, but we built a 4,000 capable patient unit that served during the COVID crisis as a destination for over 1,100 people. Now we are sitting as a mothballed hospital. We're held in case there should be any further outbreak of COVID, which of course we hope there won't be. But there's very little happening in the building itself in terms of events. However, what we decided to do, having pivoted to being a hospital, we also needed to pivot to be something our customers could use. So we recently opened a broadcast studio, which has the capacity of up to 300 people to be in a room together, a room designed for 3,000 people, so it's about a 10% occupancy, and to be broadcast to an audience that isn't able to be at the Javits Center. So a lot of recognition on our part that we couldn't sit still and be what we were, and looking for ways to be what we can be. And in fact, as David and Melba were talking there, and you're talking about dine in, David, you know, I have some very large spaces capable of very large numbers of people. Perhaps we should talk about a pop-up at Javits for a period of time. That might be a fun project.
It would be a fun project because the building is, in some ways, on the scale of an outdoor space, so it really would suit that.
Yeah. So that what we're also doing, of course, is working on the expansion. The expansion, which will be ready in spring of 2021. That's mainly an expansion of additional meeting rooms, but excitingly, we built a large outdoor space on the roof of the expansion, capable of having 1,500 people, either indoor or outdoors. And of course, we've also added a 1-acre farm up there, which will be operated by Brooklyn Grange, and which will provide food from the farm directly to our customers at Javits. So we're looking forward to being open again. I think there may be another role for us in the COVID crisis with the upcoming need for vaccination. I don't know yet, but I suspect that we will perhaps play a role in that. So we'll pivot to that too. And then hopefully we'll pivot back to being a convention center in the spring of 2021.
Well, thank you for all that you've done and what what the space has served to get us through the last 9 months, and can't wait to come back and host events there. Let's turn back to Dine In for a minute, because I want to talk about how do you figure out that next, like you pivoted once, right? And now we have to pivot again. The word of 2020 will be pivot, and I will not use it in 2021. But how are you now?
You'll pivot to a different word.
Yes, well, exactly. Thank you. How are you rethinking dining in? What are you looking at? What are you researching?
Well, what we realized about dining in is the first thing to think about is some of the middle spaces. Because even when 25% was being discussed, there was a lot of interesting discussions about, will it be safe? How can you prove it's going to be safe? We engaged some amazing engineers, including Douglas Mass of Cosentini, thinking about air filtration. And, we recognized that this was one moment where, as you're moving inside, we can look at the middle spaces, the spaces in between outside and inside, is really the key thing. So one of the main factors is greeting people outside, having a host stand that greets people outside and continues to use the outside space, stretching the season, hopefully with heaters, and we're working on a way to get heaters wholesale. And the Department of Transportation is still evolving their guidelines.
Right.
So we want to create solutions that they will accept that are somewhat affordable, together with wind protection that we're prototyping. So we're working on choreography, and we did that with Danny Meyer and his restaurants, with Melba, and with Mott Street now we're looking at how to greet people outside, create clear choreography of offering people outside seats, inside seats, or takeout, avoid cross circulation. Take those moments that are going to be the most congested and engineer those so they're not that way.
Right.
And look at some now freestanding windscreens that can resist up to 40 miles per hour wind, that you can start to protect, because heaters really are only going to take 15, maybe 20 degrees difference between the coldest temperature. Inside at Melba's, we augmented the air filtration with these ground floor-mounted HEPA filters.
Oh, cool.
So on our website and on Donate's website, we have guidelines. Everything we've developed together is open source.
Okay.
And that was important to us, that anyone can pick it up and change it and do what they want.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what does this mean for you as restaurateurs, for the other 26,000 restaurants, to continue to be able to do this throughout the winter?
Well, to continue to be able to do this means really keeping our employees working,
Right.
which is everything to me. I often say when a restaurant closes down, it's not just a physical space.
Right.
It is such a layered effect. It's the produce farmers, it's the meat markets, it's the fish mongols, it's everyone. It's our paper goods, it's the vineyards.
Yeah.
It's the truck drivers that deliver these items to us.
Yeah.
So it's not just a physical space. And it's so important for us to be resilient and to come together, just like Alan has and David have and I have and so many other New Yorkers. This is what we do as New Yorkers.
Right.
We see a crisis. We don't run from it. We run to it.
Yeah.
And we collectively figure out how we can change the situation and change the outcome.
What have you both learned through all of this? As and Alan as well, leadership-wise, right? Resiliency. How has the definition of leadership changed for you through this? With teams that I know both of you consider as family, and Alan, I know you have a very strong team as well. So how has that changed for you, Melba?
Well, my grandmother, was a very smart woman from a very small town called Hemingway, South Carolina, which had 3 stoplights. At these times, I go back to moments and things that my grandmother shared with me, and simple things, but things that make so much sense, especially right now. And one of the things she used to say to me was, "Melby," yes, she called me Melby, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. That is so that you can listen twice as much as you speak. Okay,
Love that.
I listen. I listen to my team. I listen to my restaurant family. I listen to my staff. I listen to the members of the Hospitality Alliance. I listen to our community, to the Rockwell Group. I listen much more now because in order to be a true leader, it's about listening twice as much as you speak, as my grandmother said. And it's also about collectively coming up with solutions to problems. All problems can be solved. We just have to collectively figure out how to solve them.
Yeah.
And we're not alone.
True.
We're not alone. We have each other. And as New Yorkers, we definitely will come back. This too shall pass.
Love it. David?
I guess I've learned how resilient my studio is. I mean, they've been unbelievable.
Yeah.
And
Did you ever think you'd all be working remotely so successfully?
I never thought we'd be working remotely. I never thought I'd be talking to teams at 9 at night or 10 at night,
Yeah.
and they'd all be working to try and both keep what we're doing afloat and reach out. You know, it's one of those times where we reached out to our client base and said, how can we help? And realized that they all had problems they need solved too. So I did learn how resilient they are. I also have always loved New York. And even from the first time I saw it, I love the fact that it's constantly changing. You know, the ground floor of New York, I think, is its energy source, and its public spaces are the thing that make it so vital and interesting. And to see that taken away, I think I've learned, you know, once again, how important flexibility is, how important being nimble is. When it's funny, we worked together, Melba and I worked together in '93 on another pro bono project for Minton's in Harlem.
Okay.
And then Melba called me a couple years ago about a project in Newark.
Yeah.
I ran out to see her at Newark, and it was like we had been old friends from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I also learned how important it is to reach out to people and find a way to work together. I mean, I think New York is resilient, and New York will recover. But I think the way to think about that is to see how New York has evolved over so many years. Mm-hmm. When I first came to New York, you never would have guessed that the waterfront, which had been closed off to the city, would be a necklace of parks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's going to be, you know, new ways to think about. First of all, just take restaurants, which was such a challenged industry pre-COVID,
Right.
and Melba can tell you a lot about that. The margins were so thin. So in some ways, COVID has sort of pulled the rug on how do we create opportunities for people, new people, to get into business on the ground floor and share the space and have the public interact with it. So I am very fascinated to think about how New York's going to evolve, and I am an optimist. But I don't think it's going to be quick.
No.
Yeah.
Alan, do you have anything to add from your point of view?
Well, just in terms of leadership, I mean, I think, you know, David talked about being nimble and Melba talked about listening. I think both of those are important elements. I think you also have to be a positive leader. I think there's a need for us to project the future as something that will come and be successful for us. I have very fortunate I have a strong executive team. We meet every day over Zoom or over Cisco WebEx, I guess I should give them credit. And we talk through what is happening in each of our groups. I mean, we have had to lay off 2/3 of our employees, but we do, through communication and perhaps excessive communication at times, we manage to maintain some elements of our culture. And we have now also met in the Javits Center itself. We go in perhaps once a week and meet and talk about the things that are important to us, not just on a daily basis now, but will be important to us as we go forward into the expansion of the building next year. So for me, one of the things that's been reinforced by COVID is how important face-to-face meetings are. As much as it's possible to do a lot online, as much as it's possible to do a lot in this kind of fashion, it doesn't have the same feel as person-to-person contact. And I think it's perhaps will take a long time, as David says, but I think it reinforces the wish for us as human beings to be with each other.
Right.
I think it's
Wow.
that drive as human beings to be together that is going to propel things forward. I mean, think about the theater industry. Melba was talking about, you know, all of the purveyors, all the people involved in the restaurants, the amount of different artists and craftsmen and collaborators that go into producing a piece of theater, and you know, those industries are devastated. And it's one of the things we're thinking about is how to put some of those industries to work, some of those craftsmen and artists to work in other ways, and try and be nimble with that.
That's amazing, because you are so tied deeply to the theater industry. So is there anything that you guys are also thinking about, you know, bringing other spaces back, other, you know, cultural staples within the city?
Well, we've been thinking a lot about how to help theater and listen to what might be needed, and it's such a layered problem. But I think one of the things Melba mentioned about listening is we're just gathering data. We have 2 people in our studio who are looking at solutions globally.
That's awesome.
So, you know, there will be a moment when we're allowed to go back into theater spaces in a more socially distant way. There's a lot of concern that socially distance and theater aren't a great combination because, as Alan said, you're looking for that human contact. But you know, we have no idea what that solution is going to be. But I think research, listening, starting to understand the complexity of the problem, looking at overlapping solutions in different places that can be helpful is what we can do right now.
Right. And you've looked at so many different things throughout, you know, your career, from parks to theater to hospitality, now, you know, restaurants and dine in, dine out. How has this dine in, dine out related to anything you've done before, or did you take any pieces of ideas that you've used elsewhere, like in the parks or theater? And
well, the one link was our recognition that what's going to be most helpful is trying to lead and put together taking action, and that private-public partnerships are possible. And as Melba can tell you, that there are a lot of amazingly generous people who want to contribute if you can find a mission forward. And that's what we did with the playgrounds post 9/11.
right.
And I think was what made this successful is we created a kind of roadmap, and then together we found people who were willing to actually fund that and be part of making that happen.
Yeah. Otherwise, it would not have happened.
Yeah.
But I think the
Village.
taking the action part is
Key.
key.
Definitely. Definitely.
And what are you looking at next with the Alliance? You know, what, I mean, obviously dine in, but what else are you
Well,
looking at?
you know, with the Alliance, we're always on the forefront of what's happening in this industry. But what this has allowed us to do was to band together like never before. You know, we do know that we're in crisis right now, and this is something that none of us have ever experienced before. It's constantly moving. You know, just when you think you've gotten to one specific place, it changes again. So right now, what we're trying to do is we're hoping that we get to 50%.
Right.
So that we can save as many of our restaurants as we possibly can. We do believe that saving the hospitality industry is crucial and paramount to saving New York.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah, you're such an integral part. I mean, David mentioned before that the margins are so thin. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, just the business aspect of it?
Sure.
For people that might not understand.
So when you're in the hospitality industry, it's an industry that you're in because of the love of what we do. As soon as the pandemic hit, one of the things that we started doing, like a lot of other restaurants, where we wanted to know how could we help.
Right.
So what we did was we distributed food to hospitals, to senior centers, and places all around the city. So that's first of all and foremost. We're not in this, a lot of us, for the money. We're in this because we love taking care of and giving to people. Margins typically are anywhere between 4 to 14%. So you're looking at a time where no income coming in, the rent's still due, the insurance,
Yep.
payroll, all of these things are still at near 100%, but the revenue is maybe 10%, 20%. So with us operating, those of us who are operating at 25% capacity, it makes it very, very difficult. So that's why it's important to have partners that can come in and that can lessen the blow for us and keep us afloat. I can tell you, as I'm sitting here right now, there's no way my employees, my staff, and my business may not have been open had we not had the partnership with Dine Out NYC and the Rockwell Group.
Right. And how have you seen, how many of the 26,000 restaurants do you think have been able to take advantage of this? Because not everyone has street front, so.
Well, it is an interesting question.
We do know that for the outdoor permits, there were almost close to 10,000 that applied and that were given outdoor permits, that were granted outdoor permits, which I have to say, DOT really, and small business services, typically you would apply for an outdoor permit, let's say in February. It would cost, you'd have to have an architect to do the outdoor drawings. You have to pay a filing fee. You have to pay a lawyer. Literally in 6 minutes online, everything was done. So kudos to DOT for really making that happen for us and making it a seamless process, which allowed us to do the outdoor, the open restaurants concept.
And DOT really was totally engaged in first Mott Street and trying to find those neighborhoods that were most affected by the pandemic. And in each case, we had to get 10 or 12 different restaurants around the perimeter to agree.
Right.
Which, doesn't happen very often in New York.
No, not at all. And David, your projects, are so varied. What else are you all from Rockwell Group looking at in terms of design of what's next? Are you seeing interesting projects come through because of the pandemic, or are, interesting mixed use, hybrid, anything you're paying attention to?
Well, I think it's made us sort of refocused our appreciation on the opportunities our clients give us.
Yeah.
I think it makes you realize you can't take those for granted. You really can't take any of it for granted. So we have continued to find opportunities within hospitality globally, but we've also found opportunities. I felt there are a couple of areas in and around education and healthcare where we could contribute. And we had been doing some work in those areas, but those have expanded greatly. And part of it is, as Alan says, there are things you can't do virtually. I do think there's going to be a whole bunch of buildings built with strange colors and textures because they were selected when you can't actually touch or feel the colors. So we've taken our office and taken the biggest space, removed most of the furniture, and have a bigger meeting room to encourage clients in a safe way to come look at the things we need to do in person.
Right.
But one of the advantages in terms of some of this education healthcare work we're doing is I can have myself and one or two leaders for the firm 6 hours a week in meetings globally through Zoom. So, and even Friday we're having an office meeting, and we're having our Halloween costume party remotely.
Right, because Halloween was always big in your office. And
big Halloween thing.
Yeah.
So we're still doing it remotely, but Zoom does allow 215 people to look at a presentation closer. So we're just trying to stay tuned to where the biggest open space is for us and where we can make the biggest impact, and make sure our staff and team feels like they're being creatively fueled. And
Yeah.
but as I said before, none of us really know the answer. This is a case where we know that the city will recover because we've seen it happen, and it just has to be done one module at a time.
Right. With education and healthcare, is there anything? Are you bringing hospitality into it? Are you just rethinking it? Are you?
We're bringing hospitality into it, but we're also bringing theater into it.
Love it.
And thinking about kind of the movement systems through a building, how you might look at a series of classrooms from the inside out, how student spaces are about flexibility and students controlling how things are organized. And we had done work for the Blue School before, and so it's just expanding on that.
That's amazing. And Alan, as you and your team look at the expansion, are you also thinking about, you know, because I know it's top of mind at my office very much, you know, bringing people back together and rethinking how that looks and what I know things keep evolving, but what are you all looking at?
Well, we've been working very hard to try and get the guidelines for meetings loosened a little, because right now we're restricted to having no more than 50 people in a room at a time. And unfortunately, the convention center is presently defined as one room. We actually have 2 million square feet of space. So with 2 million square feet of space, we should be able to have more than 50 people in one place. So far, we've not been successful in getting that approval from the state. I think we're getting close to it. I don't know we're going to go to a large number like ICFF attendance used to attract. But I think in the short term, we'll probably have 500 people allowed in the space at one time. That will allow us to develop small meetings, small conferences, corporate meetings, and also to have a hybrid element to it by broadcasting it to others. So, you know, we're working right now to try and give us a short-term solution, which is to allow our customers to have some opportunity to continue their brand promotion. And the hybrid studio is the ideal place for them to do that. As we come back into producing events, there will be a significant number of precautions. We're looking at a variety of different options, including testing for COVID. So I think that those things are not yet set in stone, because until we open, I don't know what the circumstances are going to be. If we had to open today, we would have much stricter regulations than perhaps we will have in 6 months' time. So we're preparing for a reopening as soon as we can, but we're also recognizing that by the time we open the expansion, we'll have an entirely different experience. As I said, the rooftop garden space, which we can have that 750, 1,000 people in, that I think is going to become very opportune for a number of different kinds of events, much more so than we even thought when we designed it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I have to give Alan credit, because you were one of the founders of ICFF in the late 80s. So thank you for that. And we're happy to bring ICFF back to Javits next year. And I think Alan had a really good point in that, you know, it's always figuring out the new rules, right? Like what do you have to consider now? What do you, like, it keeps changing. I mean, is that, you know, just in wrapping, one of the biggest challenges for you all is just figuring out, you know, what am I allowed to do next? So you're almost thinking without knowing, right? Or planning without knowing.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest challenges, because, you know, not only do we have to pivot, but our team has to pivot. So going into the winter, not knowing what's going to happen, not having received all of the regulations and guidelines makes it very, very difficult for us.
And I think what we've learned together is waiting for those guidelines is an iffy proposition versus trying to lead the conversation. And I mean, there's amazing research being done all over. And if you can collect that, you know, Danny Meyer in Union Square Hospitality is using CLEAR, which is something you see in airports,
right,
and now being more adaptable to restaurants. So I think, you know, leading the conversation with proposals and thoughts and ideas from operators and from designers is really critical.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I can't thank you both and Alan for being here. It's just, and thank you all for what you're doing to keep our city vibrant and connected and moving forward. It's just quite amazing. I think I'm taking credit here. You have inspired other cities to do much of the same. So thank you. I am going to turn over the baton to Wanted Design's Charlene Lamb for a few announcements, and then join me right back here at 10 a.m. when I sit down in a conversation with Lean Rose. And in the meantime, don't forget to share your comments or your questions on Instagram at ICFF Official or Wanted Design, or in the question box on the platform that you're viewing us on. Thanks so much, Charlene.
Thank you, Stacy. Such a great way to start day 2 of CLOSEUP with an amazing conversation with people who love New York City as much as we do. Did you love the stage? We're here at Industry City, and our stage is designed by interior designer Kristen Cochran. We've got Flavor Paper, an Industry City tenant who is providing the backdrop. And we've got Linea Rosé with the amazing pumpkin chairs. Nanny Marquinez provided the rugs. And we have Ian Love Design with his hand-carved wooden stools. Lighting is by David Trubridge via Wackenine, as you see next to me. Quite a number of our stage sponsors are members of Be Original Americas, our organization partner for CLOSEUP. Wanted Design and ICFF are also members, and Be Original Americas is all about promoting original design and authenticity. So those are values that we hold really dear, and we hope you do too. So for the full close-up experience, I want you to consider a couple of things. One, as Stacy mentioned, you can go full screen. There is a Q&A box. There is a Q&A box. Go ahead and use that to submit your questions and your comments throughout the day. At the end of the day, at 5 p.m., we have our daily highlights, and we're going to include audience feedback there. You can go full screen. In the afternoon, we have our North American studio sessions brought to you by EQ3 and Dwell Magazine, which includes amazing studio visits. So you don't want to miss that. Go for the full screen experience. And also, as Stacy mentioned, we are, of course, on Instagram. We'll be going live. We're going on Instagram stories. So do tag us. We are at Wanted Design, at ICFF_official, and do use the hashtag CloseUpDesign. At 10 a.m., we're going to come back with Linea Rosé. They are celebrating their 160th anniversary with us. So we've got representatives live right here in Brooklyn at Industry City and coming live to us from Lyon in France. And it is a gray, rainy day in Brooklyn. We are coming to you live, but let's try to light up our mornings with some information from Wackenine. Let's watch this.